Hello again, everyone. I'm so glad to see you back in this music history class. Last time we explored the music of the Middle Ages. Do you remember what that sounded like? It was mostly sacred music, that means religious, sung by monks in churches and monasteries. And it was simple, calm, and focused on helping people pray. So the music was in Latin, and often it had only one melody line. We call that monophony. Later, we saw how musicians started experimenting with adding more voices. That was polyphony. It was the beginning of harmony as we know it. So now, today, we are moving into a brand new world. The time period we're studying today is called the Renaissance, which means rebirth. This is the name of our school, right? So it lasted from around 1400 to 1600 CE. That's about 200 years, give it or take. But what does rebirth mean? And what was being reborn? Reborn. Let's take a moment to imagine the world during this time. In the Middle Ages, people focused a lot on religion and the afterlife, what would happen after you died. That's afterlife. Life was short and hard, and many people just try to survive. So most learning was done in monasteries, and art and music were made mostly for the church, as you know. But during the Renaissance, things started to shift. People began to ask new questions like, what does it mean to be human? Or how can we understand the world through science and observation? What can we learn from the ancient past, from Greece and Rome? Those kinds of questions. This way of thinking is called humanism. Okay? Humanism wasn't about rejecting religion. It's not about saying no to religion. Many Renaissance thinkers and artists were still Christian, but humanism focused more on human life, human beauty, and human experience. And artists began painting real people with real emotions. Their work showed detailed faces, like when you're sad, your eyes go down and then you frown here. But when you laugh, your face kind of opens, right? And then your mouth goes ha ha ha, and then right, these kind of faces and beautiful buildings and even nature. And scientists like Galileo and Copernicus were discovering how the universe worked, not just by believing what others said, but by observing, testing, and thinking for themselves. And one huge invention changed everything: the printing press. You see over here, the printing press? Around 1440, a man named Johannes Gutenberg figured out how to print books with movable type. Before this, all books, including music, had to be copied by hand. Imagine how long that took. So with this printing press, it became so fast to make mass production. So now with the printing press, ideas, including music, could spread quickly across Europe. So people could learn new songs, read new books, and discover new styles without traveling for months. So let's pause and think. What do you think happens when art and music begin to focus more on human experience? You might say the music becomes more emotional, or artists want to tell personal or dramatic stories, not about religion, something original. Or music starts to be made for enjoyment, not just for prayer. That's a huge difference, right? Everything is exactly right. So in the Renaissance, music becomes richer, fuller, and more expressive. So people didn't just sing in churches anymore. They sang in their homes, at parties, in royal courts. And they sang about love, nature, friendship, or and even silly or funny things. So we'll hear both sacred and secular music today, which means religious and non-religious. So sacred means religious things, and secular means non-religious things. And you'll notice how much more complex and beautiful the sound becomes. So let's dive into Renaissance music, a time of beauty, balance, and bold new sounds. Now that we've talked about the world of the Renaissance, humanism, art, science, the printing press, right? Now, let's zoom in on the music. So, what exactly is Renaissance music? How does it sound? What makes it different from the music we heard in the Middle Ages? Let's break it down together. First, Renaissance music is still mostly vocal, the human singing. Okay, people singing, not playing instruments. Instruments did exist, of course, but they were used more for dance and entertainment. The most serious artistic music was written for voices, for singing. And those voices, they sound smooth, balanced, and blended. So let me give you some key features of Renaissance music, and we'll listen for them soon. You might remember that word from last time. Polyphony means many voices, right? In the Renaissance, polyphony became more advanced and more beautiful. All the different voices, soprano, alto, tenor, bass, move together, but they each have their own part. What was the word for that? They, each part was independent, and no one sings the exact same thing at the same time. It's like um, four people having a conversation, each saying something slightly different, but it all fits together. Think of it like a musical braid, different strands woven together. It's like a braid with your hair. Second, imitation. This is one of the most important features of Renaissance music, the imitation. Here's what happens. One voice starts with a melody, and then another voice comes in with the same melody a few beats later. It's like a musical echo, or like row, row, row your boat, row, row, row your boat, and then they go together. It's called canon. Like you understand, right? This technique is called imitative polyphony, and it makes the music feel organized, elegant, and balanced. Number three, balance and beauty. Composers in the Renaissance cared a lot about balance. They didn't want one voice to be louder than the others. They didn't want the music to feel chaotic or wild or unorganized. Instead, they aimed for perfect harmony with carefully chosen intervals and flowing lines. The music feels smooth and beautiful, not too dramatic or emotional, but graceful and refined. You can almost see a picture when you listen. Calm landscapes, flowing rivers, or people walking in harmony. Number four, sacred versus secular, religious versus non-religious. So, Renaissance music came in two main types. First, sacred music. Sacred, which means religious, sacred music was written for the church. It used Latin texts from the Bible or other religious sources. This music was usually serious, slow, and meant to help people reflect or, and pray. Number two, secular music. Secular means non-religious, okay? So secular music was written for fun, for kings, queens, and noble courts. So these songs were in the language of the people, not Latin. They talked about love, dancing, springtime, or even silly jokes. So you'll hear more about these later when we talk about the madrigal, okay? So, but first, let's listen to one of the most famous sacred pieces of the Renaissance period. It's by Josquin des Prez, a composer from around 1500. The piece is called Ave Maria, Virgo Serena, which means Hail Mary, Serene Virgin. Let's listen to the opening of this piece and try to notice what we just talked about. Do you hear one voice begin and then others join in, imitating the same melody? Can you hear how smooth and gentle the voices sound? So I'll ask some questions. Did you hear the imitation? That was each voice echoing the melody like a gentle musical wave or echo. Second, did it sound calm and balanced like we talked? Not too loud or not too dramatic, just peaceful and pure. This is the sound of the Renaissance. Over the next few minutes, We'll explore more sacred music like the Mass and the motet, and then jump into the fun, emotional world of secular music, the magical. All right, now that we've explored what Renaissance music is like in general, calm, balanced, and beautiful, let's go deeper into one of its most important features, polyphony. You've heard the word before, but let's break it down again and really understand it. So, what does polyphony mean? It comes from two Greek words. Poly means many, and phony means sound or voice. So, polyphony basically means many voices, but not just any voices. In music, polyphony means that two or more different melodies are happening at the same time and they all sound good together. Not just people singing at the same tune, like a group chant, but different tunes that are woven together, like threads in a fabric or the braids. So let's picture this. Imagine, imagine four friends each walking their own path, but somehow they all arrive at the same place at the same time. Yeah, their paths will be like this. Or, or think of a spaghetti dinner. Each noodle is separate, but all part of the same dish. That's polyphony. Each part has its own melody, but when you hear them together, they make beautiful harmony. There's a fancy term for this type of music, contrapuntal texture, from the word counterpoint. This means the voices are independent. This is a very important word, independent. They don't all move in the same rhythm or sing the same notes. Mhm. But they are also interdependent, which means all the voices work together in harmony. So when you listen to all of them all together, that should be uh, beautiful, balanced. Okay. So each voice is like a singer in a choir with their own line and their own rhythm, their own words, but it all fits. This is what made Renaissance music so rich and unique. Okay, now let's meet two composers who mastered this style, but in very different ways. First man, Josquin des Prez. Josquin lived in the late 1400s to early 1500s. He's often called the greatest composer of his time because his music is expressive, emotional, and full of clever technique. One thing Josquin loved to use was imitation, where one voice starts with the melody and others echo it, sort of like a musical game of tag. You sing what I sing, but a little later. Row, row, row your boat, and then row, row, row your boat. This kind of thing. He also played with rhythm and mood. So some of his pieces are deeply spiritual, and others are funny or even a little mischievous. One famous piece we'll hear is called El Grillo, which means the cricket. Yeah, it's literally about a singing cricket. And the second composer who mastered the style was Giovanni Pierluigi da Palestrina. Giovanni Palestrina. You have to remember those two names for the Renaissance period. Palestrina came about 50 years after Josquin. He lived in Rome and wrote mostly sacred music, that means church music, right? And his most famous work is the Pope Marcellus Mass, with many people, which many people say saved church music at a time when it was almost banned for being too complicated. People didn't like the church music because it was getting too complicated. But Palestrina's style is super smooth. Even though it's polyphonic, it sounds gentle, soft, and balanced. So his music was considered the perfect example of Renaissance church style. And even today, students still learn how to write Palestrina style music when they study counterpoint. Okay? So now it's time to listen and compare. Let's do a side by side comparison. Okay? First, we'll hear Palestrina's Kyrie from the Pope Marcellus Mass. I'll ask question. Now, let's hear Josquin's El Grillo. So, keywords, important things. Renaissance polyphony is about multiple independent voices working together. It creates texture, depth, and emotion in both sacred and secular music. Josquin showed the emotional and playful side of polyphony, and Palestrina showed the spiritual and peaceful side. So next, we'll explore more vocal forms from this time, like the mass, the motet, and then especially the madrigal, where music and poetry become best friends. So far, we've talked a lot about music written for the church, but in the Renaissance, something new and exciting began to happen. Music started to move outside the church into homes, courts, and even the streets. This was the rise of secular music. That means music that's not religious. So let's dive into one of the most popular types of secular music in the Renaissance, the madrigal. A madrigal is a short vocal piece, usually for a small group of singers, based on a poem. But instead of being in Latin, madrigals were written in the vernacular, which means the everyday language people actually spoke, like English, Italian, or French. So this made madrigals feel more personal and emotional. They were about love, nature, jealousy, laughter, like real human feelings.